What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining me on another FCP Euro DIY. Today we are working on a 2020 BMW 330i. Today on the G chassis behind me, the G20, we are going to be covering how to replace your front wheel bearings. Funny enough, these are going to be the same part numbers for your rear wheel bearings as well. So it's going to be the same general idea. We will cover that in a separate DIY though in the future. In front of us, we have a kit which is available on fcpo.com. It includes the hub and bearing assemblies, as well as your new axle bolt and the hardware to bolt up the bearings to the knuckle or wheel carrier. Typically, bearings can last anywhere from 50 to 100,000 miles. They've been known to last 200,000 miles and fail as early as 30,000 miles. The best thing to do is just listen next time you get in your car. If you suspect a bad wheel bearing, they start getting noisy, and the worse they get, the louder they will get. You'll start to hear a weird warble from the front end or rear end, depending on which wheel is bad. And then eventually it'll start sounding like a really bad wobble, to the point which it can actually start wobbling. So another thing you can do is jack up the corner of the car that you think is bad and wiggle your wheel up and down, left and right, and see if you have some play. Up and down is going to be a good indicator of a bad bearing. And as always, we recommend you do these in pairs. If your front left is bad, do both of the fronts. If your rear right is bad, do both of the rears. But before we get into the DIY, let's take a look at some of the tools we're going to need. For this DIY, we have a 1/2-inch drive torque wrench and ratchet, 3/8 drive torque wrench and ratchet. We have a caliper hanging hook to hang our caliper off to the side, flathead screwdriver, some Scotch-Brite pad to clean up our mounting surface for the hub, a hammer so we can get our disc off if it's seized on there, as well as the hub assemblies. As far as sockets go, we have a couple adapters for the 3/8 and 1/2-inch. We have an E16, a TP or Torque Plus 60. This is going to be needed to remove the old hardware and install the new hardware for the wheel hub assemblies. You can't use a regular T60 on it. They are too thin. The splines on these are a bit more square, and you'll strip it out and you'll have a bad time. So be sure to avoid that. As far as the axle bolt, you're going to need a 17mm hex and a 17mm socket for the lug bolts themselves. We have some power tools to help with the removal and install of our hardware, some penetrating fluid, some brake cleaner, some liquid moly ceramic paste so we can coat the hubs before our discs go back on. And then I have some torque seal and a paint pen just as insurance. Like always, I recommend you watch the whole DIY before tackling the job at home, should we add or change any of the tools throughout the way. Now with that, let's go ahead and get started. We have 5 17mm lug bolts to remove first. So let's zap those out with the impact. This car has some spacers, which are also available on fcpo.com. We're going to set these to the side. Before we go any further, we want to make sure that we can free up this axle nut. For that, we're going to need our 17mm hex. I like to stick a screwdriver into the vane of the rotors just to keep it from having everything kind of spin on us. And just as insurance, you can also thread in a lug bolt just as added backup. 17mm hex. Perfect. This we can get rid of, it's one-time use. All right, next we're going to continue on with making sure that our 6mm hex bolt will come out. Otherwise, there is no point in continuing if we can't get the brake disc off. You may see some hardware changing or missing throughout the video, and that's because we're doing both brakes and wheel bearings for 2 separate videos at the same time. So 6mm hex, make sure that baby spins free. We have a screwdriver in the vane of the rotor just to keep everything from spinning on us. And these are going to be nice and easy. I'm not going to pull it out all the way just yet, but we're going to go and leave it there for now. We have a 13mm bolt and a 17mm counter hold. All right, speaking of carrier bolts, let's get these 2 E16s out. All right, with the caliper carrier off / the caliper off, we can set that to the side and work on getting our brake disc off next. Again, 6mm hex to drive the rest of our set screw off. We have a new one of those. Let's get rid of this baby. depending on the age of your vehicle and when you're watching this video, soaking the threads exposed on the front side of the hub assembly will be a good idea. Maybe wire wheeling them first before you soak them down, just to get these bolts out a little bit easier so you don't have to fight them as much. I'm gonna hit them with some penetrating fluid, let them sit for about 4 or 5 minutes, let them cook, and then we'll go through the back side and get that TP60 bit ready so we can pop these off. Now we're gonna work on getting the 4 hub bolts broken free first. I'm using the 1/2" ratchet with the TP60 socket and a small 1/2" extension. I like to break them free by hand first, just to make sure I have a good bite on the head of the bolt, and then I can just slowly break them free. All right, let's get all 4 done. Now we have all of our hardware out, we can work on getting the hub assembly off. And then for that, I like to just hit it with a hammer on the bottom and or the top to break it free. Let me get it a little bit more eye level, because then we're gonna clean up everything before we put the new one in. I'm gonna take our hammer, hit the top side a bit, and off we are. While you're cleaning up this area, again, this car is only 4 years old. It's not in terrible shape yet, 75,000 miles. So I don't expect there to be too much corrosion in here, but as these cars age, that may change. So a little bit of Scotch-Brite pad, wire wheel on a drill, whatever you do, just be mindful of your wheel speed sensor. You don't have to remove this. It's not really in the way of anything. But when you're cleaning, just be mindful that you don't damage it or hit it with something by accident. A couple things to talk about. One really most important one is the way the bearing engages with your CV axle. On F30s and newer cars, they are splined face to face versus the splines running through the inside of the wheel bearing and hub assembly. So a little bit of a newer design, a little bit easier to service in my opinion. You don't have to remove the axle all the way if you're gonna do something again like wheel bearings or suspension or anything like that. So kind of nice, but it is super important that when it comes time to drive in the new axle bolt, you make sure that the back of your hub assembly is nice and flush with the face of your CV joint. We'll show you how to look at that once we have that bolt ready to rock and roll, but just wanted to show you that's how these two engage. So you always want to make sure when it comes time to the axle bolt, those are nice and mated. You'll be able to feel it. You'll feel them engage, and you'll be able to see the gap on the back side of the axle be nice and even if all looks well. The hub can only go on one way. The 2 bottom bolts are a little bit more spread apart than the top 2, so it makes it easy to see which way this goes on. Oftentimes you may have to push your axle assembly out of the way a little bit just to give you a little bit of room to get some of the hardware started. It really depends. For some reason the driver's side has a little bit more give than the passenger side, but nonetheless, let's just get this on first and get a couple threads started on all 4 bolts. Just bringing them in by hand from the back side. All right, we have the bolts just barely snugged up. I'm talking 5 Newton meters at most here. And that is because these have a very funky and specific torque procedure from BMW. Our initial torque spec in a crisscross pattern is going to be 20 Newton meters, just to make sure the hub assembly is flush to the knuckle, wheel carrier, call it what you like. Then from there, we're gonna bump that torque spec up to 140. And I'm gonna stop there because we have a couple more steps after that. We're gonna loosen and then retighten. It's a whole thing. So 20 Newton meters first in a crisscross pattern, then 140 Newton meters in a crisscross pattern, and then we'll go from there. Now we're gonna bump it up to 140 Newton meters, following that same crisscross pattern. All right, now comes the next fun part of this process. We're gonna mark all our hardware just as a insurance or safety plan. Doesn't matter where you mark it, just somewhere that you can visibly see it for each bolt. And then we are going to loosen up, that is correct, loosen up the hardware 1/8 of a turn or 45 degrees, whatever is easier for you to register. And we're going to do that to all four again. All right. For this, I'm just going to switch to my regular 1/2" drive ratchet. I'm not going to use the torque wrench for this. And again, 1/8 of a turn, 45 degrees. Now we're going to go back to our torque wrench, hit everything with 120 Newton meters, and then we're going to end it with an additional 90 degrees. Now we're just going to make sure that our axle is sitting correctly against our hub assembly. So we'll pull back, get this baby straightened out. Obviously look at it through the front side, make sure that the bolt hole looks nice and centered. For this other part too, I like to straighten out the whole assembly so that everything is nice and even and we're not fighting anything. So we'll just straighten out our other wheel. So what you want to look for, again, assuming we already had the axle bolts in, is the gap or the spacing between the end of the axle here and the hub assembly itself. You want to make sure that as you rotate everything, it's nice and even. Obviously I don't have any hardware in here yet, but if I did, give you a little bit of idea of what that should look like. As this is spinning, this should be nice and even. You don't want this to be lopsided or have a weird gap like this on one side and super tight on the other. You want it to be nice and even. Let's look at it from the front just so you can see that as well. So looking down the center of our hub, you can also see that that bolt hole is sitting nice and straight. It's not crooked to an angle or offset. It's going to be nice and in the middle. And what I like to do is just with the back of the axle, try to rotate the hub assembly. In this case, I know it's engaged properly, so I can go ahead and get my bolt started, keeping a little bit of light pressure on the back of the axle. And then I'm going to continue threading in that 17 a bit by hand here, while keeping some pressure on the back. You'll hear that spring start to compress. And at this point, once you have it pretty snug by hand, you can go on the back side again, rotate everything, and just make sure that that gap stays nice and tight and consistent all the way around. All right, at this point, it's time to get our brakes back on. So let's clean up a little bit and then we'll get ready for that. Coat the front of our hub assembly with some liquid moly ceramic paste. I also like to go a little extra where the set screw is going to go, especially because we live in New England. We're going to see salt on the roads. This is a daily driver. So we want to make sure that that hardware does not seize in for the future, next time the brakes have to be done. We're going to mount our brake disc. Again, handling it as best as possible to not get our grimy mitts on it. Line the bolt hole up for the set screw and get that one started by hand. Just make sure as you tighten it down, one, that your 6mm hex is all the way in and that your disc is nice and flush to the hub. Here we go. Not a whole lot. Perfect. Next, we're going to mount our caliper carrier assembly. We have our split up, so let's go ahead and get the caliper carrier assembly on first. We'll get our E16s and go from there. We're going to set our carrier / bracket assembly, however you're doing this, over first. Set a couple threads on that bottom E16. Now we are going to torque these down to 130 Newton meters. All right, 17 to counter hold, 13 mil just to snug them up, and then we will torque these down properly. All right, now that we have our brake assembly back on, we're gonna use our flathead screwdriver once more, and we're gonna use that in the vanes just to lock up the disc from turning and the whole hub assembly. As insurance, we can throw a lug bolt in. That way, not all the pressure is just on the little set screw. These are a bit long because we have large wheel spacers. And now we can grab our 17mm hex and torque this big baby down. We're going to tighten down this bolt in 2 stages. First is going to be 210 Newton meters. Then we're going to give it an additional 90 degrees. All right, I'll hit that with a little bit of torque seal, but now we can get our wheel back on. So let's do that next. Drop it down and finalize this DIY. We're gonna start our lug bolts by hand. The last thing we want to do is ruin everything we just did and not be able to go for a test drive. All right, let's drop it down, torque her up. With the G20 back on the ground and a crisscross pattern, 140 Newton meters is going to be the torque spec for these 5 17mm lug bolts. And with that, my good people, that is going to conclude this DIY for today. Overall, a pretty straightforward process on the G20. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, leave those in the comment section below. And if you like this video, please consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.